What is it, girl? Does somebody need help creating a budget? An annual budget is a must-have for your nonprofit, whether you are starting a nonprofit or growing one, designing your programs, recruiting board members, writing grants, or other types of fundraising, basically all the things. So in this video, I'm going to talk about some budgeting basics, how to use one, and how to start from scratch to plan out your year ahead in your budget. Welcome back to my channel. If we haven't met before, my name is Amber Melanie Smith, and I make these videos here on YouTube to help aspiring change makers with tips and strategies to help you change the world and live a life of impact and purpose. Many years ago, I started a nonprofit organization that is now my full-time career, and I love sharing all of the things I've learned, all of the mistakes I've made, and some of the things that worked for me in the hopes of helping you in your own social impact journey. So a couple years before I actually started my own nonprofit organization, I worked part-time for another nonprofit organization, and that gave me my first exposure to budgets and some basic fundraising practices. I was able to then use that information to create a budget when I first started the nonprofit that I run today, and with a little bit of luck, we also were able to secure our first little bit of seed funding with the help of that budget getting started. All that is to say, I credit learning some basic budgeting skills with helping us get things rolling. So creating a budget is not one of those nice to have skills when you're starting a nonprofit. It's required. Even if you are planning on not having very many expenses or not having any staff or being 100% volunteer run, it's really important to have a budget when you first begin an organization and every year afterward. Here are the reasons why. The majority of funders, grant foundations, donors, etc., will want to know that you have a budget and generally will want to also see that budget. Having a budget also helps you stay on track to your fundraising goals and temper spending if things are getting bigger than you expected. This is really important if you're a founder of the organization who is also investing some of your own personal money into the organization, because you want to be able to track your progress, your fundraising success, etc., to plan for eventually breaking free of relying on your personal funding to get the organization going. Your nonprofit's board of directors needs to be able to see and refer to a budget to be able to monitor its success and financial progress as well. Your board should be helping you develop and make any tweaks as needed to your budget every year. A budget also helps you stay accountable and track against your accounting practices. Any nonprofit in the United States can be randomly selected by the IRS for an audit. So having a budget combined with sound accounting practices for your nonprofit is kind of required to come out of an audit clean. So how do you use a budget? You want to use your budget to submit with funding applications, to stay accountable to the public, to help with your business planning, and more. So let's talk about how do you start building a budget from scratch. So budgets include two sections, expenses and income, and you can start building a budget with either expenses or income. It depends on what your goals are and how you generally operate as a person and as an organization. If you start with expenses, it might help you understand how much money you're going to need to raise in the income column as a nonprofit throughout the year. And conversely, if you start with income, it might help you kind of flesh out what you can afford to spend on your expenses for the year. I personally prefer to start with expenses because I'm of the mindset that I'd rather plan for what we want to do and try to raise the money to get there than plan for the money that we think we're going to have and potentially, in my mind anyway, limit what we're going to spend the money on. One thing I want to point out is that a budget is not a set in stone plan. You want to be flexible and monitor and adjust your budget regularly, unless you are a large, well-established nonprofit with revenue that you generally know you can rely on. Chances are when you're first starting out as an organization, you're going to have to adjust some things as you go. So plan on checking your fundraising progress and your expenditures. Well, you should be tracking your expenditures all the time, but check on the status of your budget at least every couple of months to make adjustments as you need with your board of directors. Okay, so let's start talking about how you create a budget from scratch to plan out your year ahead. In this walkthrough, I'm going to start with expenses. Step one is to choose your tool for actually creating the budget. You can use Excel spreadsheets or my favorite alternative, Google spreadsheets, that will allow you to use all the cool features and formulas to help you plan out the budget and do math right there on the spreadsheet. You can also write it on any kind of document, or I'm sure there's some great budgeting software out there too if that's what you prefer to do. Okay, so in order to create an effective and as close to accurate of a budget as possible, you need to do the next step of planning out your programs and projects for the year before you even start to think about money. If you're starting out as a nonprofit and you already have a strategic plan or business plan, then hopefully you already have some of this figured out. But if not, we need to do a little bit of that groundwork before you can actually start thinking through the actual line items in a budget. So if you don't have a formal strategic plan, you want to start by sitting down and writing down your specific concrete goals for the next 12 months of your organization. And this should include both your internal and capacity building goals and your external public serving programmatic goals. Internal and capacity building goals being like, well, you need a website in order to run your nonprofit, so the website costs money. That is a capacity building or internal goal that you might have to budget for in the year. On the program side, you want to think with the end in mind. You want to ask yourself, by the end of the year, how many people or animals or parts of the earth will I have wanted to serve realistically in the first year of operating, or any given year of operating the organization. You can of course have as many goals as you want, but if you're just starting out, I highly recommend starting with a single concrete realistic goal that you know you can accomplish in the first year of the organization. Then you can add more goals and scale up and grow after that. An example goals for how you're going to help the community in a year might be something like, I'm going to tutor 20 kids in the first year, or I'm going to help 50 puppies find their forever home. So step 3 is, once you've established that goal, is to work backwards from that goal. And when I say work backwards, I mean you want to think about what services, staff, equipment, supplies you are going to need to actually accomplish that goal that you stated. Okay, so as an example, and this example I will be using throughout this video, let's say your goal is to provide 1,000 meals to people experiencing homelessness in your city this coming year. Okay, so you want to ask yourself, what are the tools, the services, the items, the physical space, what are all the things you're gonna need that could potentially cost money? What are the things you're gonna need to accomplish that goal of serving 1,000 meals to people experiencing homelessness in your city next year? Just off the top of my head, a couple things to accomplish that particular goal might include a physical space to serve the meals from. It might include the meals or ingredients for the meals themselves, containers to give the meals out, silverware. Let's see, do the meals need to be kept hot or cold? Then you might need some kind of heating or refrigeration system. Will you need to store the equipment that you've bought throughout the year and you don't have room in your house? Well, then you might need to pay for storage. Do you need to recruit volunteers or do some kind of fundraising throughout the year in order to accomplish this stuff? Well, then you might need a little bit of a budget for marketing or outreach or a website. Basically, you get the idea. Now, step 4 is to research the market costs of all of the items and services you just figured out you're gonna need to accomplish the goal that you stated, in the correct quantities that you know you're gonna need to accomplish that goal. Something common I hear from people is, well, I'll just get everything donated. But we know that that's not realistic. It is highly unlikely that you'll be able to get everything that you need donated, and while it would be amazing and you should always definitely try and not be afraid to ask people within reason to support your cause and to donate items or services or whatever you need, you have to understand not everyone is in a position to do so. So you should always plan to pay the market cost for the items. And then if you're able to get something donated, awesome. You saved the nonprofit money. But if you can't get it donated, you've at least planned to cover that cost. So we're going to keep using that example I gave earlier of a goal of feeding 1,000 people experiencing homelessness, and then we have our list of items or potential services that we're going to need as examples to meet that specific goal. So this is setting the foundation for the expenses section of your budget. What I do is I have a list of everything I think I'm going to need, and I try to really think outside the box and make sure I'm not missing anything, from website to insurance to protect us from volunteer issues, or heating plates if we're doing a meal that might need to be hot, etc. So you've got your list of items that match up to your goal, and now you want to take some time to research the costs of those items on popular websites, Amazon, various department stores, etc. So you can compare prices and just find what's a reasonable approximation of what you think that cost will be, and you're going to write that down next to each item. And remember to be thinking in terms of the quantities you're going to need. So using the example, if you're going to provide 1,000 meals, then you need 1,000 forks. And let's say that you find a great deal for 100 compostable forks for $9. You multiply that out to get the right number of forks to feed 1,000 people, and your item on your budget is $90. And just in case you didn't follow that, that's because it will take $90 to get 1,000 forks. Pretty simple. Now, if your items are reusable items, like let's say food warmers, then you can just account for the cost of buying it once, and then whatever storing you need to do or maintenance you need to do for that item, instead of having to buy it multiple times, of course. Also, and this is really important because I've been burned before, you want to make sure you account for any taxes, fees, shipping, etc. that will go with the item. Now here's something cool. In many states in the United States, nonprofits can actually request sales tax refunds after they've purchased an item to get some of that money back. That's part of being tax exempt. Now keep in mind this might vary by state, and also keep in mind that not every item that you buy you can get the sales tax refund on. It depends on what the item is and the rules of your particular state. Step 5 is, okay, now that you've gotten your list of the items, services, equipment, etc. you think you're going to need to accomplish that goal that you stated for the year, go back and make sure that you haven't forgotten any other things that might be required for the proper management or administration of your organization for the year. Some of these things are common sense, and other things you might not have thought of. For example, depending on where you bank, you might have monthly banking fees. And that's just part of the cost of being able to run the nonprofit, is some of these things. For example, in many cases, starting or running a nonprofit organization for a year, you're going to need things like a website and the costs associated with that. You might need accounting software, or to actually hire an accountant to do your annual taxes. You might need a liability insurance, especially if you're working with volunteers. If they get injured, you've got to have that coverage. You might need volunteer management or fundraising software, and more. I talk about a lot of these types of expenses and other things you might consider in another video that I did called Starting a Nonprofit Startup Things to Budget For, or something like that. Step 6 is to clean up your expenses section of your budget, because now you actually have one. At this point, you should have your full list of items, services, additional management costs, etc. that you think you're going to need to run the organization to meet the goal that you set for the year. You've researched your costs, you've accounted for any additional fees or shipping or taxes, and you've got a pretty good list of what it's going to cost you to run the organization for the year. Congrats, that's your expenses section of your budget. So you can see this example budget that I have put together based on this goal and all the things we just talked about. And you can see that for this example nonprofit with this pretend goal, we have expenses totaling just under $8,000 for the year. In this example budget, and I sometimes recommend this, I've even overestimated the costs of some items just a teensy bit in case something something changes in the market price throughout the year before I buy it, or I've underestimated something, this gives me a little bit of a buffer. Now keep in mind, this example budget is for a really small organization, perhaps one that's just starting up, and it's only for one program goal. So your budget could vary widely from this, or it might look similar. It all depends on the size and scope of your organization and the goal that you set when you're starting out. This particular example budget also does not include staff. Depending on your organization, you might need staff in the first year, you might not, but once again, disclaimer, this budget is just a very simple example. Okay, so now we get into the fun stuff. In this next section of the video, I'm going to talk about how to shape your revenue and income around the expenses section that you just designed for your budget. So once you know about what it's going to cost you based on that expenses section of the budget to run the organization to meet the specific goal that you set for the year, you can start thinking about some of the fundraising that you're going to need to do in order to raise that amount of money to cover your expenses. And now in this section, I'll continue to use the example of a nonprofit with a goal of serving 1,000 meals to people experiencing homelessness in the next year and all of the associated expenses with it. And I'll talk through how I would approach raising money for a goal like that. So just a quick recap, I've talked about this extensively in some of my other videos, but in general, there's no one-size-fits-all solution for how to raise money for a nonprofit. Different methods work best for different nonprofits. It depends on a lot of factors, but in general, there are about 5 ways to raise money for a nonprofit organization. Actually, I'll include a 6th fundraising method that will help you save costs for your organization too. So we've got individual donations. This is donations, of course, from individuals in the community. It could be donations of any size, from $1 to $1 million. It could be anything. You've got corporate donations. This could be corporate grants, corporate sponsorships. You've got foundation grants. So typical, probably what you think of when you think of applying for a grant. This is a foundation, could be community or private foundation that is giving away sums of money towards a specific purpose. You've got fundraising events, which is your typical, you've got 5Ks, gala events, etc., fundraising events. You've got earned income, and this is something I will actually I've been talking about in some other videos as well, but earned income is the sale of goods or services to raise money for the organization that align with the organization's mission. And then the 6th thing that I want to talk about is in-kind donations, and all that means is someone has saved your organization money by giving you a donation of an item or service or even a discount. So in-kind is a donation that is not a financial donation. Think of things like a store giving you a gift card instead of cash, or a lawyer donating pro bono legal services. So I explain all that because when you are designing the income/revenue section of the budget to complement your expenses section, you want to think through which of these methods is going to make the most sense for your specific organization and your specific programs and projects. And if you're a brand new organization just starting out, I generally recommend trying to diversify your funding stream and have multiple ways you're bringing in money, not just one. You also want to be thinking through how well your organization is positioned for specific types of fundraising. For example, if you want to put on a fundraising event, sometimes throwing an event costs money to actually put on, and it can take a lot of time to plan, coordinate, invite people, etc. So you might be hosting an event, and if you don't raise a lot of money, then you just put in that investment of your time and money for very little results. So just something to think about. If you've got money to spend and you've got a wide audience that might attend an event, a fundraising event could work for you. If you don't have any sort of audience or network and you don't have a lot of capital to invest in a fundraising event, it might not be the best option. It might actually be a better return on investment to simply ask 100 people to donate $5 than it would to take all the time to plan an event out. So let's go back to the example I gave. A nonprofit with a goal of serving 1,000 people experiencing homelessness a meal in the next year. Now for this particular example, there are 3 types of revenue generating activities I would recommend, and I will share what they are and explain why. The 3 ways are in-kind donations. Once again, those are not financial donations, but donations of goods or services, individual donations from everyday people in your community, and corporate donations. Now here's why I would pick those 3 specific things for this specific example. Now first, with in-kind donations, the reason I would target this as a way to meet the expense needs of the nonprofit is because when I look at my budget, I see several lower cost items that I think would probably be fairly easy to get donated. But if I fail to get them donated, they're not so expensive that I probably can't make up for that cost in one of the other ways. Now, I think that they will be easier to get donated because of their lower cost, but also because they're pretty tangible items, like forks, for example. Everyone knows what a fork is. It's a tangible, simple, easy to understand item that a donor might be able to see very clearly the impact of them giving you that item. So if a store wants to give you a box of forks, it doesn't feel like that big of a deal to them. It feels like they can make a big difference by just giving you a simple box of forks. So with individual donations, I'm compelled to choose this as a fundraising strategy because when I look at my total expenses for the year, I know I'm going to be able to feed about 1,000 people for just under $8,000. That gives me a really clear way to illustrate the need and the impact to potential individual donors. I will be able to say what the unit cost is. The unit cost is how much it costs to create one of those outcomes. So one meal, about $8. And if I can say to my friend, hey, you know, if you just donate $8, I can feed someone. That's a pretty compelling, simple, easy to understand fundraising pitch. And those are the types of fundraising pitches that tend to work best on individual donors. Now, the final way I would target for raising money for this specific example is corporate sponsorships. And the reason is that because that this example tackles hunger is highly visual and tangible, and a company knows that they can get some good visibility around such an issue. So the other thing to keep in mind is that companies also like to support financially the causes where they can send their employees to go volunteer. With something like serving meals, it's very easy to build a volunteer activity around the act of preparing and serving meals. So I know that I can invite company X to send 8 of their employees to help serve this month's meals and ask for a sponsorship to help cover the cost of those meals at the same time. The company gets a fun volunteer team building activity, they get some visibility, and you get some financial support, and in theory, everyone wins. So you can see these 3 revenue strategies in my example income section of the budget here, and you also see I did something different here. I actually showed the organization raising slightly more than it needed. The actual expenses for this project I had as $7,885. I show here that the organization raised $8,000. And I did this because I want to demonstrate that it is highly unlikely that at the end of the year you are going to have a perfectly down to the penny balanced budget. You're either probably going to be slightly under in the negatives, or you're going to have a slight surplus. Or if you did a really good job fundraising, perhaps even a large surplus. Now, if you have a surplus at the end of the year, that is a good thing, because then you have a couple of decisions you can make. You can either A, choose to invest the surplus in growing your goal for that year, serving even more meals in this example we've been using, or B, use that money as an investment to grow your impacts even bigger for the next year. For example, let's say throughout the process of learning and the experience of running the nonprofit and meeting your goal of serving all these meals in year 1, you learned that if you just had a different type of food warmer or a different type of food container, you could serve 10 extra meals per month. So then you can use that surplus to invest in whatever that thing is to grow your impact for the next year. And at a certain point, as your organization grows, it's a smart idea to create a savings account or a reserve for your any extra funding that you were able to bring in, because sometimes emergencies happen, pandemic, and you want to make sure that you have enough money to protect your organization if the fundraising wells dry up. Okay, so those are the budgeting basics for a nonprofit organization just starting out or growing. I hope that this video helped you out. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell so that you can get alerts next time my next video comes out. And I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the budget challenges or breakthroughs that you've been having? Share in the comments below with our community of changemakers, and let's help each other out. One more thing, if you happen to be on Facebook, don't forget to check out my group, Change the World or Bust, where myself and other change makers are having some great conversations, helping each other out, encouraging each other, answering each other's burning questions, and generally making it easier for us to collectively make an impact on the world. So come join us, and thank you again. My name is Amber Melanie Smith. See you next time.